Some really interesting new survey data from Echelon Insights about how Americans are feeling around COVID, but also amongst Republican and Democratic voters. Let's start with the economic picture. So you can check this out and you can see that amongst people for the economic damage from COVID-19 top concerns, the number one is said that 74% were extra concerned. 44% were extra concerned around the economic damage from COVID-19. Then you could also see the same thing whenever it came to the spread of COVID-19 infections. But also, Krystal, worryingly enough, budget deficits and national debt is on there, which is somewhat cringe. It seems we have a lot of, quote, education to do for a lot of people whenever it comes to this. But school closures, lockdown policies, and more are all within there. Also, cancel culture coming in very last. May want to tell your resident Republican resident. What does this tell you, though? And this is something that we said a lot during the campaign, during the 2020 campaign, is I was like, look, most people are still more afraid of COVID than they are upset around like school closures and lockdown. That remains to be the case.
Yeah.
That does not mean that school closures and lockdowns are not a problem, just that they are not the majoritarian position in the way that concern over COVID is. Hence, if Trump had literally just been like, I am concerned about COVID and trying to do something about it, instead of leaning all into we're going to open up and more, I still think he would have probably won the election just on that message alone. And that's a huge part of why Biden is president, as his own team has admitted, which we'll talk about.
We're going to get to that one. It's also a real sign of how different the experience is for normal people versus elites in Washington economically.
Yes,
so
100%.
a lot of the top line numbers looking pretty good. Mm-hmm. People around here feeling like, we're getting back on track. We'll get this one more relief thing passed and we're going to be good to go. And this overwhelmingly bipartisan concern about the economic fallout from COVID, it also gives you some insight into why the checks have been the most potent political policy in the November election and also in the Georgia elections, why those checks resonated so clearly, and also how Democrats are kind of like fumbling the ball here by, we'll make it 1,400. Let's talk about means testing. We said immediately we've been a few months down the road. They're still doing way better than the Republicans, none of whom are going to support the $1.9 trillion package at all. Yes. So they're still vastly preferable to what the Republicans are offering. But it does show you that, look, if you want an actual like bipartisan, majoritarian type of politics, focusing, as always, on the economy is what's gonna really get the job done. So the other thing they did, which is really interesting, is they asked Republicans their top issues and they asked Democrats their top issues. And they're like polar opposite in a way that's actually really distressing, but also not all that surprising.
Pretty revealing.
So let's put the Republican concerns up on the screen. They are most concerned about
number one, illegal immigration.
Lack of support for the police, high taxes, liberal bias in mainstream media, general moral decline of the country, socialism, and Antifa violence rounds out sort of like the top of the list there. And let's actually go ahead and throw up the Democratic preferences because I want to make the comparison here. So for Democrats, let me just pull this up on
this
my
one
screen.
Actually, frankly, disturbed me a lot more.
I mean, there's very similar, though. So the Democratic one, the number one concern is Donald Trump supporters.
Yes.
Number two, white nationalism, systemic racism, and you have to think in their minds probably white nationalism and Donald Trump supporters kind of the same thing. Gun violence, Americans lacking health coverage. Okay, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Domestic terrorism, police brutality. But the most significant thing here is that overwhelmingly the number one issue that they're concerned about are Donald Trump supporters. And if you look at the Republicans' top concerns, a lot of them are basically code for liberals. They're worried about liberal bias in media. They're worried about Antifa. They're worried about, right? I mean, this is like even the lack of support for police. These are all issues of like, I'm worried about liberals. That's the thing that scares me the most is these crazy liberals destroying the country. And the liberals are like, the thing I'm most terrified of are these crazy conservatives supporting Donald Trump destroying the country. And that's how you end up with really volatile situation, something we've covered here a lot, where people feel like the most existential threat to themselves and their family isn't the pandemic, it's not foreign terror, it's not climate change, it's their fellow citizens, and that leads to a really frightening landscape, frankly.
Yeah, and you want to talk about partisanship and polarization, this is it. Whenever both sides' most potent concern is the other side, this is what you get. And it means Biden really doesn't have to do anything in order to get 98% approval rating in the Democratic Party. Yes, that is correct. That's where he stands
just by
right
not
now.
being Donald
Just
Trump.
by not being Trump. And Trump at CPAC, it's already come out. The number one thing he's going to open with is an attack on Biden, probably about the election was stolen. But number two is going to be illegal immigration and talking about police and
socialism,
all of this. And socialism.
Make an appearance.
So both of those two things are the drivers of our politics. And when I say culture war is king, this is what we are saying. In terms of the primary basis of what these individual constituencies care about, it is hating each other, and it's a bad place to be in terms of everyone.
And it didn't come out of nowhere.
No,
this whole framework was created and profited off of and continues to pad the bottom line of major media outlets, cable news in particular. But
it's very profitable.
It's very profitable, and so this isn't going to change anytime soon. You can already see it with Democrats going all in and the media going all in on Republicans are the party of QAnon. Even though, what was the poll we said? 4% of Republicans have a favorable view of QAnon. I mean, again, look, Republicans open themselves up to this. It's probably a pretty effective political tactic to the extent that regular Americans even know.
For your
primary for sure, but even in the general election, if you're focused on this suburban core, it's probably an effective message there. But it would be an even more effective message is actually giving people checks, recurring checks, focusing on the economy, going big with those things would be a much more effective if you really wanted to win a big election. But that would require actually doing some things, and it's easier to just put together an ad that says Republicans are the party of QAnon.
There you go. All right.
More Rising for you after this.